70. Not a celebration, but a funeral where I was still alive to hear my own eulogy. That was how it felt when my daughter-in-law raised her glass at my birthday dinner and said, "To the old lady who will soon be in a nursing home, soon you'll just be a memory." The room erupted in laughter. My son Michael chuckled as if she had delivered the cleverest joke. My grandson Tyler snickered without looking up from his phone, and even the waiter paused to hide his smile. I froze champagne halfway to my lips, the words hanging in the air like poison. "Come on, Viola, it's just a joke," Yara said, noticing my expression. "Don't be so sensitive. We all know how independent you are." Independent. She said it as if it were a disease. I had spent decades trying to love Yara as a daughter, teaching her family recipes, sharing stories of Thomas, welcoming her into traditions, even giving her and Michael the down payment for their house. Nothing was enough. And now, on my 70th birthday, this was the family I had waited a lifetime to see, reduced to laughter at my expense. Speechless, I forced a small smile, raised my glass, and sipped. The champagne was bitter, but the truth was far worse. When Michael dropped me off at home that night, I felt the familiar ache of invisibility pressing in. 40 years in that colonial house, a life shared with my late husband Thomas, and here I was, dismissed, reduced to a joke. I locked the door and let the tears come. Not delicate, dignified tears, but the kind that leave you gasping, wrung from years of being taken for granted, of giving until nothing remained for yourself. I cried for Thomas, for Michael, for the family I had loved with all my heart, and most of all, for myself. When at last the sobs eased, I walked to the mirror. My makeup was ruined, my eyes puffy, but my reflection stared back with something I had not seen in years, clarity. "Enough," I whispered. "Enough." The next morning, I called my bank. "I want to liquidate my investments." I told Jim Peterson, who had known Thomas and me for over 30 years. He blinked in surprise. "Viola, that's substantial. Are you sure?" I was. $8 million accumulated from life insurance investments, and the sale of our family business would soon be mine alone to command. I paid the penalties, signed the forms, and felt an unfamiliar thrill, the first taste of freedom I had tasted in decades. Then I called my lawyer, Gerald Webbs. "I'm changing my will," I said simply. Michael and his family would no longer be my primary beneficiaries. Jerry looked at me, eyebrows knitting. "Viola, this seems sudden." I shook my head. "It isn't. It's 5 years in the making. Since Thomas died, since I stopped being seen as a person and started being seen as a convenience. It's time I lived for myself." Later that afternoon, I sat in the small cafe where Thomas and I had Sunday brunches, sipping cappuccino and watching people pass by. For the first time in years, I felt breath in my lungs, space in my chest. Michael called repeatedly. Text after text, "Tyler needs a ride. Yara has her charity luncheon. We need you." Each one a demand, a reminder of the life I had been expected to serve. I ignored them all. Instead, I opened the travel brochure I had kept hidden for years, a Mediterranean cruise 15 days from Barcelona to Athens. I traced the itinerary with my finger, imagining the sun on my face, the smell of the sea, the thrill of stepping into a life I had always dreamed of but never dared to claim. Yes, I would go, and this time I would go for me. The morning of my departure arrived crisp and clear. My suitcases, newly purchased for this journey, stood by the door like silent sentinels, ready to carry me away from a life that had grown too small. My passport, updated after Thomas's death, but never used, lay in my purse alongside a new credit card and a significant amount of cash. I walked through the house one last time, touching familiar surfaces, inhaling the scent of home I had loved and yet was leaving behind. Standing in Thomas's side of the bedroom, I whispered, "I hope you understand, Tom. I need to find myself again." The taxi pulled up at exactly 9 a.m. I did not look back at the colonial house as we drove away. My heart beat faster, an unfamiliar mixture of fear and exhilaration. At the airport, I followed the signs for my flight to Barcelona, heart-hammering hands trembling slightly as I checked in. First cruise, the woman behind the counter asked her American accent, warm and familiar. "Yes," I replied, trying to steady my voice and alone. She smiled knowingly. Terrified excitement. Right, I remember it well from my first solo trip. Her words made me smile, a tiny flicker of camaraderie with a stranger who understood. The flight was long but manageable. I watched 2 movies, ate the airline meal, even managed to sleep for a few hours. And when the plane descended over the Mediterranean coast, the sun glinting on the azure waves, tears welled in my eyes. I had made it. The celestial voyager awaited gleaming white against the deep blue of the harbor. I clutched my documents and followed the crowd up the gangway stomach, tight with anticipation. The ship was magnificent flags fluttering in the gentle breeze, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight of expectations lift from my shoulders. I was truly free. On deck, I met Agatha Reynolds, a woman about my age with short silver hair and piercing blue eyes, who greeted me with a warmth I hadn't expected. "Ready for the sail-away party?" she asked, smiling. "I think so," I admitted, smoothing my pale blue dress that I had bought specifically for this trip. Champagne in hand, we stood at the railing, watching Barcelona recede, the skyline slowly shrinking until only the endless horizon remained. "To new beginnings," Agatha said, her glass raised. "To new beginnings," I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. The city disappeared behind us, leaving only sky-sea and the promise of life untouched by anyone's expectations, but my own. By the 5th day, I had settled into a rhythm that felt both novel and natural. Mornings on the balcony, wrapped in a plush robe, coffee delivered to the room breakfast with Agatha, afternoons exploring the ports or attending lectures, and evenings dressed for dinner with fellow passengers who were slowly becoming friends. There was the retired professor from Boston, the widowed doctor from Chicago, a couple celebrating their 50th anniversary, all strangers who had never defined me by family obligations or old expectations. I was simply Viola, a woman with opinions, passions, and dreams, long buried, but now blooming. In Marseille, I discovered photography. The vibrant colors of the old port called to me, and I captured them with the camera I had purchased in Barcelona. In Rome, standing before Michelangelo's, Pieta tears streamed down my face, moved beyond words by beauty and history. "You're changing," Agatha observed one evening on my balcony, the lights of the Italian coast twinkling in the distance. "Is that strange?" I asked. "To change so much at 70, she laughed. "What's strange is thinking we ever stop changing. Life is constant transformation. The tragedy is when we let others freeze us in place." I thought of Michael and Yara, of the way they had reduced me to convenience, how years of Sunday lunches and taxi runs had diminished me to a single dimension. Somewhere along the way, I realized I had measured my worth by usefulness, not by respect, by how much they needed me, not by who I was. And now, watching the sunset over Naples, I finally understood the eruption I had ignored for years. The tremors of dissatisfaction, the warnings of being unseen had been mine to heed. When we docked in Naples, I stepped onto the narrow cobblestone streets and was immediately swept into a city alive with history, color, and scent. The ruins of Pompeii called to me, and I walked among the plaster casts of the city's victims, men, women, children frozen in their final moments, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, a reminder of how fragile life could be. I stared at a woman, her arms raised as if to shield herself from fate, and a thought struck me. How many times had I ignored my own warnings, convinced that nothing would ever truly change? "You're thinking about your family," Agatha said softly, as if reading my mind. I nodded, surprised at her perception. "I keep wondering if I did the right thing, leaving without explanation," I admitted. She squeezed my hand gently. "They wouldn't have listened. They only hear what they expect to hear." That evening, as the ship sailed toward Greece, a call came on my stateroom phone. My heart leapt in emergency. But it was only the cruise director calling with a proposition. A fellow passenger had noticed me taking photographs during our port excursions and suggested my work be featured in the ship's gallery. Me, I asked, stunned. "Just an amateur," I added, laughing nervously. "Sometimes the freshest perspectives come from those who haven't been taught the rules," he said. The offer was genuine, and over the next 2 days, 5 of my Mediterranean photographs were printed framed and hung in the gallery. My name, Viola Harrington, glimmered on the placards beside them, as if someone else's life had been grafted onto mine, and yet it was mine. At the exhibition opening, champagne in hand, strangers complimented my work, asking about technique and inspiration. I simply smiled and admitted I was learning that the cruise was my first real adventure with a camera. The kindness, the curiosity of others felt like sunlight flooding a room that had been dark for decades. Later, the ship's photographer offered to purchase 2 prints for the permanent collection displayed in the main dining room. Stunned, I barely found words to respond while Agatha nudged me with a grin that said, "Welcome back to yourself." Each day, the confidence I felt grew. I attended art classes in Santorini, capturing the iconic blue domes and whitewashed streets in watercolor, and I marveled at how comfortable it felt to claim space for myself. The phone remained off most of the time. When I did glance at it, there were dozens of missed calls and texts from Michael and Yara, some frantic, some pleading, but I didn't respond immediately. My priorities had shifted. I was no longer a cog in their machine. I was a person with dreams long deferred. Finally, I sent a brief email, "I am safe and well on my Mediterranean cruise." I needed time for myself after years of putting everyone else first. "I will contact you when I return. Until then, I ask that you respect my privacy." The relief that followed the send button was almost physical. A weight lifted from my chest. Time at sea became a rhythm of self-discovery. Each port offered lessons in history, culture, and unexpectedly courage. In Ephesus, I wandered among ancient columns and imagined the thousands who had lived before me. In Istanbul, the Grand Bazaar dazzled with colors and scents, and I found myself bargaining confidently, a skill I hadn't used in decades. The world felt vast and welcoming, and I was finally ready to step fully into it. I was a 70-year-old woman navigating new cities, capturing moments on filmmaking friends, selling prints, and claiming the life that had been waiting patiently for me all these years. Yet as the final leg of the cruise approached, I knew I had to face the consequences of leaving my old life behind. Returning home would require courage, resolve, and clarity I had only recently discovered in myself. The woman who had been diminished, ignored, and laughed at was gone. In her place stood someone unafraid, someone alive, and someone ready to reclaim her story. The flight back to the States gave me hours to prepare to imagine the moment I would step into the life I had left behind, but no longer belonged to. I reviewed my finances on my tablet. Everything from the house sale to the proceeds from investments was finalized. I had purchased a small condominium downtown site unseen, trusting the virtual tours and my intuition. It was modern, manageable, and most importantly, mine. For the first time in decades, I had done something entirely for myself. When I turned my phone back on after landing, the notifications were overwhelming. Messages from Michael escalated from anger to concern to reluctant acceptance. One text sent only 2 days ago read, "Mom, I don't understand why you left the way you did, but I hope you're finding whatever you're looking for. We miss you. Tyler keeps asking about you. Please come home." Home. The word felt strange in my hands. My house, the one Michael and Yara had expected to inherit or control, was sold. My possessions either stored or donated. Home was no longer a place. It was a feeling, one I had finally learned to hold for myself. I checked into a hotel that first night, not ready to face them, immediately savoring one last night of independence, waking without obligations, without expectations, pressing down on me. I needed clarity. The next morning, I rented a car and drove to Michael and Yara's suburban home. The familiar streets felt foreign now, as if I were navigating someone else's memory. Sitting in the driveway, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation I knew was inevitable. Michael opened the door before I could knock. Relief, worry, and a hint of something like fear crossed his face. "Mom," he said, voice cracking slightly. "You're back." "I'm back," I replied evenly, stepping inside. The house was immaculate, perfectly arranged to Yara's exacting standards, yet strangely lifeless, as if the beauty had been achieved at the cost of warmth. Tyler's eyes widened when he saw me. "Grandma," he exclaimed, running forward. I hugged him, noting how he had grown, how his presence was one of genuine connection, unburdened by the expectations of his parents. "Where's Yara?" I asked, noticing her absence. "She'll be back soon," Michael said, studying me like a puzzle he couldn't yet solve. "What happened? Why did you just disappear like that?" I placed my purse on the counter and took a seat. "I needed to find myself again," I said simply. His frown deepened. "Find yourself, Mom, you're 70, not 17. The old me would have flinched, would have apologized for daring to exist outside their expectations. The new me simply smiled. "Exactly," I said. "For too long I've measured my worth by how much you needed me, rather than how much you respected me." Tyler surprisingly nodded. "Grandma's right," he said quietly. "We've been taking her for granted." The room fell silent, the words settling like sunlight through a window. Michael looked lost, unsure whether to argue or absorb the truth. Yara returned then, perfectly composed, holding a yoga mat, her expression shifting as she took in the scene. "Viola," she said as though testing her own voice, "you're back from your adventure." I nodded. "Yes, and I'm not staying where I was expected to be. I've sold the house. I've bought a condominium downtown. I'm moving in next week." Her gasp, almost theatrical, betrayed a flicker of unease. "But that's so far. How will you help with Tyler's schedule Sunday lunches?" She trailed off. I cut her off gently. "I won't be driving Tyler anymore. I won't be hosting Sunday lunches. I will meet you occasionally at restaurants, perhaps once a month. But my life is mine now." Michael opened his mouth, hesitated, and finally said nothing. Yara's composure cracked slightly, her eyes revealing the recognition of a force she had never anticipated, a woman who refused to be diminished, a life that could not be contained by expectation. I stood purse in hand, feeling a strange calm. "That will be your choice," I said to Yara. "This is mine." I walked out, leaving behind their perfectly ordered kitchen, their controlled environment, and the roles I had been forced to play for decades. Outside, the air felt lighter, freer. I was no longer just a memory waiting to happen. I was alive fully, unapologetically. The year that followed passed more quickly than I could have imagined. My downtown condominium became a home in every sense, filled with photographs from my travels, art purchased from local galleries, and objects that reflected the woman I had become. I enrolled in photography classes at the community college, joined a book club, and volunteered teaching English to new immigrants, things I had longed to do, but had set aside for decades. For the first time, my life felt fully mine, a tapestry woven with my passions, my choices, my voice. I maintained monthly dinners with Michael and Tyler, sometimes with Yara, sometimes without. The dynamics had shifted subtly but meaningfully. Michael struggled to reconcile the mother he had known with the woman I had become, vacillating between grudging respect and frustrated incomprehension. Tyler, however, became my closest ally, seeking out our time together as an escape from the rigidity of his parents' house. "I like it here," he said one afternoon as we sat on my balcony overlooking the city park. "It feels real." Yara remained polite but distant on the rare occasions we met. I understood that she viewed my transformation as a personal betrayal, a rejection of the careful hierarchy she had established with herself at the top. And yet for the first time, her presence no longer carried the power to wound me. As my 71st birthday approached, I decided to host a small celebration, not out of obligation, but to mark the occasion surrounded by the connections I had cultivated over the past year. I invited Michael, Tyler, Yara, and friends who had become family to me, Sandra, my photography instructor, David and Ruth neighbors, and several members of my book club. The morning of the celebration, I prepared simple yet elegant hors d'oeuvres, arranged fresh flowers in vases I had brought back from Greece, and set out wine and sparkling water. My home reflected my life now, authentic, vibrant, and entirely my own. Guests arrived and the house filled with laughter and warmth. As I introduced Michael and Tyler to my friends, I watched the subtle shift in Michael's expression. He had never seen this version of me. Viola, the photographer. Viola, the avid reader. Viola, the traveler. Not Michael's mother or Tyler's grandmother, but a fully realized individual with her own voice. Tyler integrated naturally, asking David questions about architecture, his enthusiasm genuine and unpressured. Michael lingered quiet, observing this new world I had built. After cake, Yara approached me, voice cautious. "So this is your new life?" she asked, gesturing vaguely. "I'm not alone," I replied, voice steady. "I'm independent. There's a difference." She gave a small, dismissive laugh. "At your age, isn't it the same thing?" I shook my head. "No." This, I gestured to my home. "The photographs, my friends, this is being complete. A year ago, you thought I was finished, ready for the shelf, ready to be a memory. But look around, Yara. I'm just getting started." Her smile faltered, uncertainty flickering across her face for the first time. Tyler bounded over excitement, lighting his expression. "Grandma David says you might be able to photograph his daughter's wedding next spring. Is that true?" I smiled, pride and gratitude swelling in my chest. "Yes, we've been discussing it. I'm still learning, but I've been paid for my work." Yara's eyes widened, and I knew she was seeing me in a new light, no longer just a resource or an obligation. That night, as the guests departed and the city lights sparkled below, I stood on my balcony with a glass of champagne. The journey from humiliation to freedom, from invisibility to recognition, had been long, but it had been mine. Yara's cruel birthday toast from 2 years ago echoed in my mind, but this time it had no power. The woman I had been then was just a memory, yes, but the woman I had become was alive, strong, and unapologetically myself. I raised my glass to the stars, to the endless possibilities still ahead, to the last laugh, and to the life I had reclaimed. My story wasn't ending. It was finally being told in my own voice, clear and unwavering. No one else could define me, and I would never allow my worth to be measured by anyone else's convenience again. If this story resonates with you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to reclaim yourself? And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of courage, reinvention, and the power of taking your life back.